In the 1920s of Boston, a man named Charles Ponzi promised investors a 50% return on their investment in just 45 days. Such was the allure of this proposition that throngs of people flocked to him, money in hand, ready to partake in this seemingly lucrative venture. But what exactly was the catch? Charles Ponzi, an Italian immigrant with a knack for persuasion, was the mastermind behind this scheme. His plan was simple but ingenious. He would pay off the returns of the old investors using the funds from new ones. This fraudulent operation functioned like a well-oiled machine, as long as the influx of new investors remained steady. Ponzi's venture revolved around the arbitrage of international reply coupons, a form of postal currency. He claimed to exploit price differences between countries, promising investors hefty returns. But in reality, the profits were non-existent. The money wasn't invested in any legitimate business. Instead, it was a cleverly constructed financial carousel where money just went round and round. As word of this seemingly foolproof investment spread, more people were drawn in. They were blinded by the promise of quick and extraordinary profits. The investment operation grew larger and larger, ballooning beyond Ponzi's control. It was a castle built on sand, destined to collapse, and collapse it did. When the constant inflow of new investors started to dwindle, the scheme began to crumble. Ponzi's promises of high returns soon proved empty. The lack of new funds exposed the stark reality. There were no profits, only a vast void of financial deceit. This led to a cascade of ruin. Investors found their pockets empty, their trust shattered. The man they had put their faith and money in was nothing more than a charlatan. Ponzi's scheme eventually crumbled, landing him in prison and leaving his investors penniless. Thus began the infamous legacy of Ponzi schemes, a deceptive ploy that would go on to ensnare countless victims in its web, sowing seeds of greed and despair in equal measure. While Charles Ponzi may have lent his name to the scheme, he certainly wasn't the last to employ this deceptive tactic. Over the decades, Ponzi schemes have evolved, adapting to changes in society, technology, and regulations. One of the most notorious examples of this evolution is Bernie Madoff's $65 billion scam. Madoff, a respected figure in the finance world, leveraged his reputation to attract wealthy investors. His scheme was more sophisticated than Ponzi's, exploiting the complexities of modern finance to create an illusion of legitimacy. However, the mechanics remained the same, using funds from new investors to pay returns to earlier ones. It was a precarious house of cards that eventually collapsed, leaving thousands of victims in its wake. As we moved into the digital age, these schemes continued to evolve, leveraging technology for their nefarious purposes. Cryptocurrencies, with their promise of high returns and relative anonymity, have become a new frontier for these scams. Fraudsters have exploited the regulatory grey areas and the general lack of understanding about these digital assets to swindle investors out of their hard-earned money. Another evolution has been the rise of crowd-funded Ponzi schemes, where the internet is used to attract a large number of small investors. These schemes often present themselves as investment clubs or social causes, exploiting the sense of community to lure in victims. However, it's not all doom and gloom. This evolution of deception has been matched by an evolution in detection and prevention. Law enforcement agencies, financial institutions, and regulatory bodies around the world have become more adept at identifying and combating these scams. Technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence are being harnessed to identify suspicious activity, and regulations are being updated to close loopholes and protect investors. Education, too, plays a key role in prevention, empowering individuals to recognize the red flags and avoid falling prey to these schemes. As Ponzi schemes have evolved, so too have the methods to detect and combat them. Behind the staggering sums of money involved in Ponzi schemes, there's a more personal, often overlooked cost. We've all heard about the astronomical figures linked to these scams, but let's delve deeper into the real human cost. Imagine for a moment, you're an average person, perhaps even a retiree, who's worked diligently all your life, saving and investing in the hope of a comfortable future. You're approached by a charismatic individual, promising huge returns on your investments. You're skeptical at first, but they seem legitimate. They've got a track record, testimonials, and they're incredibly persuasive. You're drawn in, you invest, and for a while, things seem to be going well. But then, the unimaginable happens. The scheme collapses. The promised returns evaporate. Your hard-earned savings, your dreams for the future are gone. The financial devastation is immense, but the emotional toll is even greater. You're left with feelings of betrayal, shame, and a loss of trust that can be hard to rebuild. This is the reality for countless victims of Ponzi schemes. They're not just faceless numbers on a balance sheet. They're real people whose lives have been irrevocably altered by these scams. Fraudsters prey on their victims' hopes and dreams, using psychological tactics to lure them in. They exploit trust, create a sense of urgency, and leverage social proof to make their schemes seem credible. And yet, despite the damage, these victims often remain in the shadows. There's a stigma attached to being duped, a sense of shame that can prevent victims from coming forward and sharing their stories. But it's through these stories that we can truly understand the impact of Ponzi schemes and work towards preventing them. So, let's remember, Ponzi schemes are not just about the money. They're about the people they hurt, the trust they betray, and the lives they shatter. The real tragedy of Ponzi schemes lies not in the lost millions, but in the shattered lives of their victims. While Ponzi schemes can be incredibly complex, there are often telling signs that can alert potential victims. So, let's take a look at some of these red flags. The first flag waving in the air of deceit is the promise of guaranteed high returns. Ponzi schemes lure unsuspecting victims with the glitter of gold, offering returns that are substantially higher than the market rate. Remember, in the financial world, high returns are often associated with high risk. If someone promises you a risk-free path to wealth, tread carefully. Next, we have unregistered investments. Legitimate investment opportunities are typically registered with your country's relevant financial regulatory bodies. Unregistered investments are a common characteristic of Ponzi schemes, as they allow the fraudsters to operate under the radar. Be suspicious of any investment opportunity that cannot provide registration details or transparent information. Then there's the case of overly consistent returns. Real investments fluctuate. They have good days and bad days. But Ponzi schemes often show consistently high returns, regardless of market conditions. This is because the returns are not derived from any real investment, but rather from the money injected by new investors. And let's not forget about the mysterious, overtly complex strategies. If the investment strategy is difficult to understand or shrouded in jargon, be cautious. Legitimate investments should be able to explain their strategies in a clear and understandable way. Lastly, the importance of due diligence and skepticism cannot be overstated. Ask questions. Do your homework. Seek professional advice. Don't let the promise of quick riches cloud your judgment. By recognizing these red flags, you can equip yourself with the knowledge to steer clear of these financial traps. Remember, you have the right to understand where your money is going and how it's being used. Don't let fraudsters take that right away from you. As we progress further into the 21st century, the landscape of financial fraud is shifting. The old tricks of the trade are being replaced with new, sophisticated tactics. For instance, consider the rise of cryptocurrency scams. As digital currencies become more mainstream, fraudsters are seizing the opportunity to create elaborate Ponzi schemes in this unregulated space. They promise astronomical returns on investments, using the mystique of blockchain technology to lure unsuspecting victims into their traps. But as the methods of fraudsters evolve, so do our defenses. Technology is playing a pivotal role in preventing Ponzi schemes. Advanced algorithms and artificial intelligence are being employed to detect unusual financial patterns and flag potential scams early. Regulation, too, is catching up with the digital age. Laws are being updated to protect investors in the digital currency space, and regulatory bodies worldwide are working tirelessly to keep pace with the evolving landscape of financial fraud. Technology and regulation, however, are only part of the solution. The primary defense against financial fraud remains the same: vigilance and education. As individuals, we must take responsibility for our financial decisions. We need to do our homework, ask the tough questions, and remain skeptical of too good to be true investment opportunities. As communities, we can work together to spread awareness and educate each other about the common signs of financial scams. Remember, fraudsters thrive on ignorance and complacency.